Today's video is brought to you by Game Eats. A little something salty, a little something sweet, or if you're looking for something healthy, Game Eats knows what gamers want. Link down in the description below. What does it take to be a good Dungeons & Dragons or Starfinder player? Are you a good player because you know all the rules in D&D 5e? Are you a bad player because you enjoy building powerful characters that others might consider power gaming? Does your lack of voice acting make you a subpar player, or does being new to the game mean that you aren't a great player? I think the answer to all of these questions is a simple no, but it can be a little more complex than that. So I think there are a lot of newer players to the game because, let's face it, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, coupled with the unbelievably popularity of Critical Role, has brought a ton of new players to the game that feel like they are pretenders at time, or because that they haven't been playing D&D for 10 years, that they're not as good as players who have. And I see a lot of people leave comments here or on Reddit and Twitter that seem to be self-deprecating in their own abilities to just be a good player at the table. Or worse yet, in my opinion anyways, people who think they're the best thing since sliced bread, who frankly I would kick out of my game because they're more harmful to the group than fun to be around. I'm just saying. So I wanted to put together a sort of guide to help new players and veterans alike take a step back to really evaluate themselves. And more importantly, as we go through this list, see if something jumps out at them that they should work on to kind of get to that next level. And I've come up with a simple tier system to help people visualize the differences between a terrible player, an average player, and an outstanding player. Okay, let's start with tier 0, the worst of the bunch. Now, I don't want to be a downer, but a few of you, and it's not many, fit into this tier. This is what I'm affectionately dubbing as the disruptive player. The disruptive player comes in many shapes and sizes, but most importantly, they are the players that kill campaigns and break up groups because, frankly, people don't enjoy playing with them. Disruptive players are players that argue. They can be rules lawyers, but they don't have to be. I, for one, have always hated the negative connotation of rules lawyers because I feel like it gets attached to good players who simply prefer to play strictly rules as written. And there's nothing wrong if you enjoy that kind of play. But where rules lawyers become disruptive players is when the DM makes a call in the heat of the moment and the player decides to argue with the ruling. A disruptive player can also be the person not paying attention in combat because they're on their phone or doing whatever, and now they have to figure out what they want to do while everyone just waits for them to catch up mentally to figure out what actions they're going to take. A disruptive player can be the person who wants to step in front of everyone during every roleplay, or they can even be the power gamer who wants their character to be the party face while they pick every lock, solve every puzzle, make every skill check tank, all while trying to outshine everyone else in combat. Or they can even be the RPer that wants to talk for 15 minutes to every shopkeep just to negotiate every single little piece of copper when buying another 50 feet of rope. And they're also the unprepared players, the guys and gals who don't know what their characters can do, who show up to a session last minute thinking they can build their character quickly and end up spending 30 minutes creating their character because they don't know what spells they should take. And of course, they are the people who will pout when things don't go their way, or who cannot handle if their characters die or drop early into fight. And yes, some people pout when they don't get their way in the game. So it doesn't matter how long you've been playing, how many rules you know by heart, or if you swear you can roll up a character in the 5 minutes before the first session. If you are being disruptive to the game by arguing, slowing the evening down, hogging the spotlight, or pouting, you fit into this tier. And it's not the end of the world if you do, as long as you work on those things conscientiously to improve. All right, moving on to tier 1, we have people just learning how to play. Everyone is new at one point, and unless you are a disruptive player, you'll pretty much start here. These are people who are still being helped by the group to figure out the difference between a D20 and a D12 and when to roll each. Now, I love playing with people in this tier, and they are absolutely welcome at my table, so don't think you're a crappy player just because you're new to the game. This is most likely a tier that you won't spend a lot of time in, and there are a few basic mechanics you can start to learn to progress quickly as a player. Focus on understanding the game's basic mechanics, like resting, how spell slots work, the difference between a check and a saving throw, and how your spell DC is actually calculated, as well as what actions you can take in combat. And in no time, you'll have progressed significantly to the point where you are no longer slowing down the game, and the DM and fellow players don't have to stop and explain where you can find your AC on your character sheet and what bonus you get to roll when the DM asks for initiative. Tier 3 is the average player. This is where most people fit, including a good chunk of veterans. These are players who have a solid understanding of the game's mechanics, and they also understand that they should probably take notes when the DM introduces a new NPC. I mean, what a concept. They show up to the first session with their characters already created and ready to go, with some included small backstory, or at a minimum, an idea on the personality type their character will have, or an idea on what motivates their character. There are also players who understand their class mechanics, which I'm going to give some of you guys the hard truth here. If you don't understand your class and all the things it can do by the third session, with the caveat that you aren't in the middle of learning a brand new system like Warhammer or something, you've slid down into being a disruptive player. I'm sorry, it's just true. Because the Dungeon Master is putting in a lot of prep. Even if they're a brainstorm in the shower and improv at the table DM, they're putting in time, thought, and effort into running the game. The least you can do is read the 3 to 4 things your character does in combat to understand how your offhand weapon works, or when to roll sneak attack dice, and how to disengage as a bonus action. Constantly stopping to remind the DM 15 seconds later as they've begun to move on to the next person in combat that, wait, I forgot sneak attack, so the bugbear takes an extra 5 damage. Guys, that's disruptive. Players at this tier have also begun to understand some of the very basics to the setting. At minimum, they know the pertinent information about their clerical deity, and they will most likely know a few things about some of the places, like about the masked lords of Waterdeep, for instance, or that Neverwinter is a part of the Lord's Alliance. If they're Starfinder players, they probably understand that the Vesk are militaristic, and that the humans from Akaton have red skin, and that drift technology rips small little pieces from other planes of existence whenever someone makes a jump. And they also understand the basics of roleplay. They may or may not use a fun voice for their character, but they know how to take those character motivations and backgrounds to start making RP choices for their characters. They can follow along with other players who slip in and out of roleplay when they adjust the way they speak, and they're players who I find can separate themselves from metagaming about 50% of the time. In one session, they might get caught up in the moment and out of character say, oh my god, guys, this is a beholder. This is a beholder, when signs start to point that way when exploring down in the Underdark. But in the next session, they'll catch themselves and they'll purposefully stop giving out advice and discussing tactics with their team when their character drops unconscious early in combat. This is the largest group of players in the game, and if you're a new player or an unprepared disruptive player, those are some of the things that you can work on to start becoming a better player. Okay, now let's look at the good player tier. If you want to be considered a good player at the table, or if you think you're a good player, here are some of the things that you should be doing to be considered a good player. Good Dungeons & Dragons player know how to involve others in the game. These players will recognize when a player hasn't spoken in a while, and they will naturally engage them into the roleplay. If players A, B, and C are having a discussion on what they should do next, a good player, let's say player B, will stop and roleplay their character asking player D what their thoughts are, instead of just worrying about spilling all the background info that they've written up for their character. They'll turn and ask another player a question and begin to engage in their story. They recognize scouting opportunities and might even suggest another player who either is better suited or simply hasn't done much in this session so far, that they should be the ones to check the corridor up ahead. And they also recognize party roles, deferring to the party faced first in a social encounter and allowing the shield-wearing fighter whose player built them to tank for the party to lead everyone into the next room. They know that just because they deferred to the bard to introduce the party to a noble doesn't mean they'll get left out of the conversation, and they are comfortable in allowing each player their moments in the spotlight. Good players also recognize story hooks the DM is laying out, and they will follow up on them. And they never argue, well, why would my character do that? He would just take the gold and retire. Ugh. They understand the group of players are there to play Dungeons and Dragons, and that everyone at the table wants to have a good time and enjoy each of their moments in the spotlight. Another thing a good player does is they understand how to roleplay. That's to say, they understand the separation of the player and the character and can truly avoid metagaming, which doesn't mean that they constantly make poor decisions because their character wouldn't know. It means that they can sort through each scenario as it comes up to determine the amount of information their PC would know based on the setting and their background, and of course act accordingly on that. And finally, and this is something a lot of average players can work on to get to this tier, good players know how to accept character death. Having a character die unexpectedly can come as a shock. But guys, it happens. It's not the end of the world. It shouldn't derail the campaign, unless the entire party wiped. And quite frankly, it's a part of the game. Ironically, for people who rail against character death because they claim to be all about the story of their characters and screw combat, don't realize how impactful an unexpected character death can be on that very story. Without Mufasa's death, Simba doesn't return as the prodigal son, and instead most likely grows up to be a spoiled prince turned spoiled king. But good players know how to accept the fact that their character is gone and that it's time to roll up a new one without pouting or blaming the dungeon master for creating an unbalanced encounter. So, what separates these good players from our great player tier? Well, first off, great players have mastered the art of improv by learning how to say yes and. They aren't thrown off guard in the heat of the moment when the dungeon master shakes up a session by saying, "And as the four of you look up at the hooded figure as they begin to pull down their mask, one of you recognize the woman. She speaks in a familiar raspy voice to you. 'Hello, Errol.' And as her cold black eyes of undeath lock with yours, you stare at the bloodless pale face of your younger sister, Ramina." A great player is capable of adding in spur-of-the-moment dialogue and retconning a new backstory with the DM on the spot. They may even reply something along the lines of, "I thought you lost to the sea. I saw you go overboard." Even though the player and DM may have never mentioned a younger sister before. Or they can add into their fellow player's backstory tactfully during roleplay when that player mentions a past event involving both of them by elaborating on a few more details. Great Dungeons and Dragons players also understand the table. That's to say that they understand the nuance of not just the game, but also of the group. They can get a feel for the table's pacing much like a DM can. And in fact, a lot of these players have been DMs in the past or are running their own games from time to time, something I would recommend to you guys. They know how to gauge the session's pacing and can be great at helping heavier roleplay groups move the story along more naturally than waiting for the DM to break up a 15-minute section of dialogue between players arguing about the best strategy for the next room in the dungeon. And they can also handle PvP with tact. They understand that sometimes a small in-character argument or conflict can add to the story, but they don't approach those conflicts with the mindset of stubbornness, that their character must come out on top. And they understand how to have those inner party friction moments without taking it personally, and more importantly, without derailing the session. They can separate their friends at the table from the characters involved. And when working with another great player, they can get in this moment of PvP without escalating it, and then get back to the game and story that the DM has created, all without someone being bludgeoned to death. They work conscientiously to keep PvP at an absolute minimum while still allowing the PC group to continue to develop as dynamic characters. Okay, so that really only leaves us with our extraordinary D&D player tier because, I had to have something up here, I guess, after great players. What separates people like the Critical Role cast from everyone else? Is it their voice acting? Is it their production? I would say yes and no. The truth is that a truly extraordinary player is one that becomes fully immersed in their character while not losing sight of all of the things it takes to be a good player and to be a great player. You don't need to be a voice acting savant to be an extraordinary player. If you want to practice a character voice for 3 weeks in the car leading up to a session 0 for your next campaign, that's awesome. And I'll admit, my neighbors have certainly caught me practicing a voice for an NPC or two while pacing on my porch like a maniac, so I get it, I'm not judging. But the point is that mastering a French accent for your character isn't what you should be prioritizing. Only after you've learned how to read the table, start accepting character death, and are involving others at the table in your roleplay should things like voice acting matter. Only after you've learned to fully immerse yourself in your character should you be worried about mastering the glottal stop and the difference between the American little and the received pronunciation accent of little. Simply put, accents don't make you a great player. Take David Fryan of Nerdarchy. Dave, I love you, my man, but my lord, that New Jersey accent gets applied to just about everything when we play on Saber Dice. It's really funny. And don't worry, I'm not firing shots. Dave will tell you that he can't do accents. But let me tell you, Dave is an absolutely extraordinary Dungeons & Dragons player. His characters of Jogo, Worm, and Venkus are masterfully played by him. It's really stunning. And being in those games when he turns it on really raises the bar for everyone else at the table. He is a fully immersed player, and each of those characters feel completely different regardless of how similar they can sound. So for me, the things I like to work on when trying to master a new character is I like to think about a few scenarios the character might come across and how they'll react. I like to think about phrases they might use and come up with some catchphrases unique to my character. And I try to specifically look back at recent characters to create as much separation from them with the new character that I'm working on as possible. This helps me prevent the lines between one character and the next from becoming too blurry. But honestly, it's something that I am still working on. I know that as a DM, I am usually a very serious and in-the-moment DM, but as a player, I prefer a more beer and pretzels type of game. So I still work to be a better player. And that's really the best thing you can do as a player. Just constantly try to improve. Hopefully this video will serve as a guide for some of you on areas that you can work on and improve as players. And maybe you've mastered some things from higher tiers, but you might see something from a lower tier that you feel like you might tweak a bit. Also, this is obviously not an all-inclusive list, so I want to ask you guys, what are some of the things you think should have been on this list that great players do? What are some of the skills that newer players or average players just haven't had kind of click into place for them yet? And I'm really curious, where do you think you fit? Do you think of yourselves as good players, average players, or are you even self-aware and you're a disruptive player and you know it? I, of course, want to thank all of the amazing, wonderful, sexy patrons over at WelcomeAdventures.com. Guys, I really appreciate all the support. It's because of you that I can keep doing this. So if you enjoy this content and you want to support more content like this, Welcome Adventures is a great way to do that. And you can snag some rewards for yourself if you want to hop in a one-on-one coaching session before you DM your next game or figure out where your campaign is heading. You can do all of that and more at WelcomeAdventures.com. If this is your first time here and you love role-playing games as much as I do, I'll admit it, I do. I would love to have you subscribe. Every week I put out new videos on GM tips, player tips, tutorials, and more. So if that sounds like something you might be interested in, just hit that subscribe button down below. Wait, I think it's over here. And come join us. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Cody, and may your games be filled with awesome memories and even better friends. I'll catch you guys next time.
Yeah.